Welcome back from Paris, the Rebel's Edge. I am Jon Najarian. My brother Pete in points unknown, but I'm sure he does know that since the rate cut, rates have gone like this, not like this. And Bitcoin has had a pretty nice rally. We'll talk about both and a whole bunch of stocks on today's Rebel's Edge. Bang!
There you are in Paris. I was going to say something else. I don't want to be offensive, but there you are in Paris.
Well, they used to call it Gay Paris.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, I don't know.
Anybody wants to take offense to that, let them. It's not meant as an offensive statement, but right. That is what they used to call Paris, Pete.
Yep.
By the way, in a fabulous hotel here, we're going to be hanging out with some friends for a big birthday that one of them is recording.
Uh-oh.
And since the female, I won't say who or what the age is, Pete, but it's going to be a fun time to be over here for sure.
That's one of those, John, where you look at her and you go, whatever age you think in your head, you go, you know what? I got to go 15 years younger.
Yeah. Sweet lady for sure. But the flight over wasn't bad. A lot of nice people on the flights, and everything went pretty smooth. So can't complain. Welcome back to the Rebel's Edge, folks. He is Pete Najarian over there on that side of the screen. I'm Jon. And Pete, let's dive right into the macro minute, which today I'm going to cite once again Germany. Germany indicates significant slowdown in both services and manufacturing sectors. Some of you are shaking your heads going, so what? It's the largest economy in Europe, so what? And their PMI, Purchasing Managers Index, that's below 50, Pete, which means, basically it's contracting. It's not expanding. It's 47.2. That ain't good. Europe more broadly is accelerating the slowdown, not the speed up. So that's one of the reasons our markets are having a little bit of trouble staying on that rally horse, Pete.
Yeah, that's for sure. Although I will say this, we've set some serious records as well along the way. So we had 2 weeks ago, John, we had that pause, and then everybody got excited again because we got CPI and PPI, and they were able to get pretty excited about everything that was happening there, and we closed out pretty nicely. And then last week, of course, we had the Fed, and we all know how that went, and including just going all the way into the weekend. The fact that we held on to those gains was pretty impressive. And today, a little bit of the same. What's the next thing? I'll tell you what the next thing is. Everybody's watching the PCE. They're looking at it for Friday. So we're always looking at this different data points because that has been the trend. If that trend shifts to something else, we'll go with it. But for now, John, especially since that is what the Fed supposedly, that's their favorite gauge. Well, I'm going to be staring at the PCE. I wonder if that's why we're a little bit quieter today. Are we going to be quiet all week? I don't know the answer to that one, but it could be. We were quiet in the early parts of the week on the other few weeks when we were getting some of that data. So it's going to be interesting to see how we do as we get closer and closer to Friday.
Well, so ahead of the PCE, Pete, we do have Bitcoin continuing that rally. It's up 1.75% today, 63,600 or something like that. Was as high in the 24-hour day as 64.6, I think. So pretty nice rally. It's done. And again, because folks, it's a no yield instrument. So when the Fed cuts rates, that tends to help no yield or low yield products rally because they don't have the same competition they had half a point ago. So what do you have for unusual, fantastic futures?
Yeah, well, the fantastic thing for me, John, is, a lot of the time I'll pull out something else, but I got to stick with the volatility index, and here's why. Over the last 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, we were somewhere in a much wider range, call it 15 to 22. Then last week, it was closer to 15 to 19. And I would say post-Fed, now we're looking at a 15 to 17. We're somewhere between the upper 15s and lower 16s. and we're in a very, very, what feels like a tight range until it won't be. But for right now, I think it's going to be very interesting as we get through this week. Where are we as we get to the PCE number and beyond as we get into the Friday trade? That's something to look forward to for sure. But volatility has certainly come down, 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 down ever since that big spike.
Yeah, it sure has. And deservedly so.
Mm-hmm.
Again, part of what the VIX tells us is the uncertainty, not necessarily just, oh, the market's going up or down, but uncertainty in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that uncertainty was met last week with certainty out of the Fed. And as you described, Pete, he did a pretty good job detailing why he made that cut, why he muscled the other members of the Fed into it. All right, let's talk about Intel, Pete. Intel, the stock was just on its backside. It had traded down into the teens, and it was looking like it was circling the drain. But then, Pete, they started to get a whole bunch of good news. Apollo Management taking a look at them, maybe making a $5 billion investment. And then you've got Qualcomm saying, you know what, at this price, maybe we should buy them, the whole company. So we're seeing some pretty good activity in Intel, Pete. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I find this one pretty interesting, John. And if there was a time, if you were somebody like Qualcomm and you're looking at this company and you're saying, you know what, it's now or never. And I would say that's probably right. I don't know that we're going to see Intel sit down here. Like you said, it was in the teens. It was 18. Here we are now a little bit closer to 20, 22, somewhere in that sort of a range. But I just don't understand if there's too much overlap. I don't know enough to know if this makes a heck of a lot of sense for them. But in terms of the price is probably about as low as it's going to ever be if somebody wanted to come down and scoop up Intel. And I say that right after saying that, I'll say this. They've got a market cap of very close to $100 billion. So this would be a pretty big chunk if somebody wants to take that. I think Apollo Group, as you said, they're talking about a $5 billion type move. That would be pretty interesting too. But, you know, this is going to be, if it were to happen, Qualcomm's going to have to use a heck of a lot of stock and a heck of a lot of cash to make this deal happen.
Yeah, and an awful lot of debt. But with interest rates down, that might not be as scary to them. But the biggest deal ever in semiconductor history, yeah, this would be that. And I don't know that, even though they're mouthing it, Pete, I don't know if they've got the full appetite for that. That's a big bite. All right, let's talk a little bit about what's going on with General Motors, because we knew they said they were going to lay off about 1,700 workers in Kansas. Now, I think all of you understand that businesses in general don't lay people off when business is great. Business is not great for General Motors. And in particular, a lot of their people that work in that Fairfax plant, Pete, facilitate the production of the Chevy Bolt, their EV. Now, everybody's been cutting back on EVs except for Musk, Pete, but this is a pretty big deal that GM is laying people off in this manner. And I don't think they're the last in the auto space. I think they're one of many to do this.
Yeah, I think everybody's just trying to eye it up, John, and trying to figure out how can they navigate through this thing as best they can. Obviously, with rates coming down, that's going to have some effect, one would think, at least on automobile sales, maybe to the positive. They get a different rate, all the rest of it. You know, the interesting thing, I was looking at this company, GM. I hadn't really looked really close in a long time. It's not far off the 52-week highs, which was right around that $51 level, John. But I think the interesting thing is there's a pretty substantial short interest here. And I'm not saying that's something that's going to come into play right now or at any time in the future, but you know, you look at GM and you go, you know what, this is blue chip, right? And you look at them and you say, well, all of a sudden you say 4 to 5% is somewhere in the short interest side of this. That's pretty interesting. So there's a few folks that are betting against them. I'm guessing a lot of those folks probably betting against the EVs in the near term, not distant out, not 10, 15 years out, but more so in the near term. So this is going to be something. I just saw the CEO was just on TV this past week talking about all the different changes that are going on at GM and all these different EV cars. Some of them do look pretty spectacular. Some of those Cadillacs, John, are pretty incredible. But I do wonder, we just keep seeing 1,400, 1,500, 1,700. They just keep bringing this down. And to your point, that's not necessarily bullish, but it could end up being bullish potentially if things are done right.
Yeah, and you hate to see people lose their jobs.
Yeah.
This is one of those examples, and I'm sure in Fairfax, Kansas, there aren't a hell of a lot of other jobs people can just jump right into.
Right.
All right, let's talk about Constellation Energy, Pete. Last week, big deal, because all of a sudden, Microsoft said, you know what? We want a pretty much guaranteed power source. And if you give it to us, we're going to sign a long-term contract for our data center. And they did it in the 3 Mile Island area, Pete. So, yeah, that 3 Mile Island, folks, where we had, the only real nuclear disaster that we've had in this country. Things have changed a lot. They had basically taken one of those, and it had been completely offline, Pete. But now, even though we reacted to this when it came out, they're not going to restart this thing and start providing power for Microsoft till I think 2027 or 2028. That's how long it's going to take, Pete. But nonetheless, these guys are in the news. They're making moves like that, and they're getting upgrades across the board.
Yeah, and they've done everything right so far, John. When I look at Constellation, I mean, the quarter looked good, their guidance had looked good, and it wasn't this week, but recently. So it looks pretty impressive to me right now. And this kind of a deal, it shows you how Microsoft is not just here in the near term; they are looking out into the future, knowing how much between AI and data centers and everything, all of the energy that's going to take. And you and I have talked about this a lot, between each other and on Fox Biz and other places, but the reality is nuclear is back, and they're back in a big way. And take a look last week, some of the numbers out of CCJ, UEC, a lot of the various names that are out there providing some of this power source. Now, Constellation, they do it as well, but they do a little bit of everything. They got the nat gas, they've got it all, John. So solar, hydro, all of that. But I'll tell you what, I would venture a guess in the next 3 to 5 years, nuclear will become one of their biggest sources for sure. And I'm pretty confident in that. And I'm also watching nat gas prices go up, 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 up all of a sudden. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is. And the fact that 3 Mile Island is no longer just Chernobyl or just Fukushima, it is coming back. Rather than being something that was really bad that happened in the past, which it was. But coming back is a pretty big deal for nuclear in this country.
Yeah.
All right. How about BioHaven, Pete?
Yeah.
This one, BHVN, up over 20% after releasing pivotal trial results. Now, Pete and I always caution people when they hear, pivotal trial, I better jump in here and buy this thing. Well, it depends where they are, folks, in those trials, because there's phase 1, there's phase 2, there's phase 3, and they take years and a lot of good fortune, hard work by the scientists and so forth as well to get through those tests. But this one's looking like it might be working its way into people, Pete, which is a really good thing for people that have about 15,000 people in the United States have a disease that these guys can address.
Yeah. These rare diseases are very difficult. And when you look at this company, BioHaven, it's pretty interesting. Their high cash burn is there. Short interest, 12%, that's there. So that actually helps them move to the upside when they start moving to the upside, hit up to $49 a share today at the highs that I saw at least. They got preclinical, they've got 14 in the pipeline, John. At phase 3, they've got 6. So this is a company that's not that terribly far away from getting the opportunity to maybe start making money. Because as of right now, it's a high cash burn. But they get this thing approved, and that could be monstrous for a company like this. I'm not saying it's something you go out and you grab it. I'm just saying that it's something you better put on your somewhere on your radar so that you have an opportunity to remember this thing is not that far away from potentially having some drugs that could get to the market. And under those circumstances, they might be able to start making a little bit of money. And if that's the case, this is a completely different company than they are today.
Yeah, they go from being that cash burn to starting to get an awful lot of money for those 15,000, as many as 24,000 people, I guess, globally. This would be a big drug for that.
Yeah.
Well, Pete, I know your Vikings are on a roll. Do you want to talk about the Vikings? Do you want to talk about the Colorado Buffalo? Since the Buffalo came back against a really stout Baylor team, who do you want to talk about?
Well, I think we start off the NFL. Is there a bigger surprise right now for people other than huge Minnesota Viking fans? I would say no. They're 3-0, John. They went out to New York. They beat up on the Giants. Giants aren't very good, so let's forget about that one. Although they didn't look bad yesterday. And the quarterback, that's the problem with these up and down quarterbacks. When we played against them, Daniel was pretty bad. And yesterday, he was pretty good for the Giants. Anyway, we lose our quarterback that we've moved up in the draft to be able to grab him, J.J. McCarthy. He goes down. Next thing you know, you got Sam Darnold. You start worrying about the season, right? We go out to New York. He plays probably one of his best games that he had played as a pro. Then he comes back here. We beat the 49ers. Nobody expected the Vikings to beat the 49ers, but the Vikings did. And they kind of dominated. The numbers were very, very equal, but it was a game that I felt was pretty dominated, quite frankly, by the Minnesota Vikings on the 49ers. And I say that as a guy who was kind of on both sides of it. I got friends over at the 49ers. I got friends over at the Vikings. So I was kind of, Switzerland. I was somewhere in the middle. But then this week, well, holy crap, Houston, right? Houston's got the greatest quarterback since Joe Montana, practically. Everybody, CJ Stroud. And I think the world of the kid. I think he's a great kid. He's going to be a great pro. He brought him last year to the playoffs in his rookie year and was unreal. Didn't throw very many interceptions. I think he threw 25 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, something like that. We lit him up, John. We go out there, the Vikings, we beat them, I think it's 34-7. I mean, it was never close. The Vikings ran the ball well. They threw the ball well. Justin Jefferson came back from what was a bad thigh contusion. He played, got another touchdown, did his little ditty dance and all the rest of it. The Vikings look pretty damn good. They've scored 85 points, and they've only given up 30 in the first 3 games. So I would say right now, that's the best-looking team in the NFL. Now, I'm not saying these guys are going to the playoffs, and I'm not saying they're going to the Super Bowl. But right now, early on, that's the best team out there. I think the Steelers would be another one where I'd be interested, but they got no offense. I mean, they got just enough offense to win, but their offense just isn't there yet.
Yeah, well, this was the first game, and that's the team that I'm going to say is the surprise, Pete.
Yeah.
Because they're 3-0 also, as Pete knows. They're 3-0, and, it was difficult for Denver to basically cut a guy that they traded the world for, but they did it. They took the hit, they got rid of him, and then he's just been sort of injury plagued since he's been with the Steelers, Pete. But our former quarterback, Justin Fields, was just steadily progressing. Everybody said that he was getting better and better, and this was his first start. Rather than coming in substituting or whatever, this was his first start this weekend. And he was 245 yards of offense, Pete, and a 90 quarterback rating. So he's 25 of 32. He throws for 245 yards. The offensive coordinator was smart, didn't have him throwing down the middle of the field where you've got a lot more people. He was doing little swing routes and other stuff rather than trying to, force the ball into the middle of the field, which a lot of teams make a mistake doing that. But 1 interception, also 1 touchdown, and 240 yards or 245 yards and a QBR of 90. That ain't bad for your first start, Pete. And with that offensive line, that defense that they always have in Pittsburgh, they could surprise some people. And you and I think, both thought that Baltimore was going to be a lot better than they've been so far. But these guys look really good, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, you brought up Baltimore. I'll just bring up this. Baltimore finally figured out how to play call with what they've got. They went out and got the best running back in all of football, I think. Derrick Henry's big, fast, strong, no body fat. The guy just wants to run over people. He had a pretty nice game yesterday, John, and he's had a few pretty nice games. Give the guy the ball. It's why you went out and got yourself a running back, to give your quarterback a little bit less time running the ball and getting hit by people. So I think they're starting to figure this out a little bit better there in Baltimore. And I love John Harbaugh, but, there was a game or two where he wasn't giving the ball to Henry enough. I mean, give that guy the ball 30 times a game. Let him run over those little linebackers that are in the NFL now. I mean, they're all fast, but, John, very few of them are very big. These days, the linebackers in the NFL, you're about 225. There's a few teams that have big ones, but very, very few. And I'll tell you what, 225 going up against a 255-pound running back, I think I know who's going to win that one most of the time. All right, NCAA football, John, how about this? Who would be the sleeper team, maybe even the sleeper, conference? First of all, sleeper conference is the Big 12. They just are. They've got so many teams that look really, really good this year. It's pretty fun. It's pretty impressive because we all know about the SEC. We all know about the Big Ten, all these different schools that are coming in there. ACC looks a little down outside of Miami, who's pretty freaking unbelievable. But I'm going to throw out a Big 12 team that people probably have forgotten about. How about BYU? BYU, John, so far is 4-0. All they've done is go down to Dallas. They beat up on SMU. They went out to Laramie. They beat up on Wyoming, who's always a good football team. It's where Josh is from, Josh Allen. And then they come home. They beat number 13 in the entire country, Kansas State, 38-9. They didn't just beat them. They whooped them, right? So BYU's got something going on right now. They got a big receiver, this kid, Chase Roberts, 6'4", 210-pound guy. And then you've got Jake Raskloff. I'll tell you what, this guy's their leading rusher. Obviously, he's a quarterback. He's leading them in passing. He's thrown for nearly 1,000 yards. He's got 9 touchdowns. He's got a few interceptions, 3. This kid is lighting it up. And I'll tell you what, with the numbers that he's putting up on the scoreboard, he's one of those kind of guys where at some point you might say, is this guy somewhere in the Heisman ballot? Maybe, because the Big 12 is for real this year. Who's a sleeper for you?
Well, the Buffalo, Pete, the Colorado, no. But I had to put that in there just because they forced an overtime, and then they won it in overtime. And it was difficult conditions, rainy conditions. I thought that, the team that I saw against Nebraska didn't have a prayer against these guys, against Baylor, because Baylor's pretty stout, Pete. But they did come back. They put it into overtime with a Hail Mary pass and then came out. But you're saying, okay, who else is a surprise or whatever? I'm surprised by this. I'm surprised that Texas gets away with playing University of Louisiana Monroe. Why?
They've all got them, though, John.
Third or fourth game of the season, Pete.
Yeah.
I mean, 51-3. God, Texas against its own third or fourth string couldn't put up 51 points. But all right, I think your team, Ole Miss, Pete, is just also very stout. I'm using that word a lot, but they are tough.
Yeah.
And Georgia Southern ain't Louisiana Monroe.
No.
Georgia Southern has a tradition of really tough football players. Yeah, they did beat them 52-13, so it seems kind of like that Texas score. But I think Georgia Southern, Pete, is a team that nobody really likes playing those guys. They're good. They just don't have the depth, is what I'd say. And just to throw one more out there, Pete, Michigan could have folded. I know they're not your favorite, but they could have folded against USC when USC came back and went up on them at the very end of that game. And they had negative yards in the first half. USC did, and came all the way back. but then Michigan slammed the door on them. So there were some pretty interesting football games this weekend.
Yeah, and I think that you're right about Michigan, John, and I say that as a guy. I've been pretty open about how much I dislike them, but I always can have a neutral, and when I'm looking at them, breaking them down, right? I look at Michigan. They all of a sudden in 1 week figured some stuff out that they hadn't figured out. I mean, honestly, it's amazing how teams can do that. But I think that they turned a page after that game. They lose at home pretty bad to Texas. Now all of a sudden you've got USC, who everybody thinks is a world beater. Let me tell you, USC, welcome to the Big Ten. We actually play physical football in the Big Ten. We don't just lollygag around out there, and everything else. They actually play a lot of really physical football. And USC, UCLA's already feeling it, John. They're getting their butts kicked every week. But, you look at Washington, you look at Oregon and some of the rest of the schools. I mean, it is a different brand of football. It just is. Just like the SEC is a little bit different than the Big Ten as well. Probably a mix of both the Pac and the Big Ten. But for right now, USC, they can look great at times. But when it comes to a team that's physical, I'll even throw a team like Iowa. Well, I was watching my Gophers play against Iowa. My Gophers were up 14-7 at the half, and then we just got whooped in the second half. Well, I'll tell you, why did we get whooped? Because Iowa played Iowa football. They just started running the football behind a big offensive line. They didn't try to be tricky. They basically said, this is what we're going to do, and if you can't stop us, we'll just do it. And they did that in the second half. And they had a running back go over 230 yards against the defense that had looked pretty good. So it just shows you. And I think the physicality of, and I hate that word, but the physical style of football that we see in the Big Ten, some of the Pac-10 teams, Pac-12 teams, whatever they are, they're going to be eye-opening, I think, when they get through the full season.
I'll leave the viewers with this one, Pete. There has to be no greater thrill for Northern Illinois than to beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame.
Right.
And likewise, there has to be a pretty big letdown, even though I'm not saying Buffalo's a bad team, and we ain't talking the Buffalo Bills, folks. We're talking about Buffalo college football. Beat them in overtime. That's like taking a dagger in the heart.
Oh.
That's really tough. But obviously, they were all pumped up for that Notre Dame game, played their hearts out, deserved to win. And then, unfortunately, put it all on the field. And in overtime, they lost, I think, 23-20. That was another good football game this weekend, Pete. There have been a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, the Nebraska-Illinois game at Nebraska, Illinois their quarterback looks like he can throw on anybody, John. I mean, he really does. And Nebraska could have won. They didn't. Their quarterback overthrew a guy in the end zone. Otherwise, the game would have gone the other way. But I'll tell you what, Illinois and Indiana in the Big Ten right now are playing some real football. And Indiana's got a quarterback and a running back and an offensive line and a coach that people all are like, why didn't we go after this guy? Well, Indiana did, and they got themselves a stud.
Well, we will be back, folks, tomorrow with the Rebels Edge at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll remind you that we're just a couple weeks out from the Mastermind event in Miami. There it is, October 11th, Rebel Mastermind. If you scan that QR code there on the screen, or if you dial us up, 888-808-8058. That's 888-809-8058. You can join us in Miami, October 11th, live trading, education. It's going to be a great day, folks. It's going to be a lot of fun with some great people. Pete and I will see you tomorrow. Have a good one, everybody.